Well, I think we can all agree it's been a pretty strange year. If you told me a year ago that this year you'd all be sitting at home while I'm standing in an extended reality soundstage in LA, I would have not believed it. It's important to keep our sense of humor in times like these, but we also need to keep in mind there's been a lot of suffering and a lot of grief. We all owe a huge debt to our healthcare and frontline workers and first responders. They took on more than their fair share of the burden, especially in the first days of the outbreak. We also want to honor a group of people that are seldom recognized by their companies or colleagues. They work tirelessly to keep others safe from danger that threatens them every day. They are the IT and security professionals in our audience today. The changes we've experienced in the past 8 months have been staggering. First, the pandemic, triggering economic recession combined with political and social unrest. Makes you wonder what's next. There have been many unforeseen impacts, but one is universal, and that's the sudden and overwhelming reliance on technology. Everything we used to do out in our communities and in the world, we've discovered we can do it all from the safety and comfort of our homes. Commerce, communication, medicine, socializing, and our day-to-day jobs. It's been life-changing for us as adults, but it's also impacting a whole new generation. Moving education online, millions of empty classrooms, parents and teachers inventing new ways to learn. We were forced to adopt these new ways of life, and it hasn't been easy or pleasant. It's been exhausting, sometimes heartbreaking, but it's also been an opportunity to reassess, recalibrate, refresh, retool. Unfortunately, cyber criminals and bad actors around the world also saw an opportunity in the crisis. They prey on emotions like fear and uncertainty. They use misery to their advantage. As a result, the global attack surface became exponentially larger and harder to defend. Security and IT professionals have been on a consistent state of high alert since February, and we're still not out of the woods. I talked to one CIO back in the spring who I knew was pursuing a big multi-year digital transformation project. I asked him how it was going. He told me they had a 2-year roadmap that they executed in 1 day in March. This is not an isolated incident. COVID-19 forced many organizations to speed up their timetables for digital transformation. Recently, we surveyed over 4,000 senior decision makers worldwide. They told us that more than half of the global workforce had already shifted to remote work as a direct result of the pandemic, and many of them are never going back. We strongly believe that today's mandatory work-from-home environment is the precursor of a permanent shift to a work-from-anywhere economy. This economic and technology transformation is happening globally across every conceivable industry: healthcare, finance, retail, tech, government, communications, education, entertainment, and beyond. Typically, massive transformations don't occur overnight. But in the case of COVID, business and IT leaders had to act fast. Most of these transformations adopted a similar approach. Organizations had to rapidly provision fleets of new endpoints. They had to spin up new cloud workloads and authorize the use of BYOD devices and unsecured Wi-Fi. One thing a lot of organizations came to realize: for their digital transformation plans to work, they first had to embark on a security transformation. Take the cloud. It's the key ingredient of virtually every digital transformation initiative. Most of us were used to providing security for fixed assets, data centers, and physical endpoint devices like servers, desktops, and laptops. But securing the virtual equivalents of those devices requires an entirely new kind of expertise. It's a different kind of technology where you don't own the infrastructure, and people will make mistakes in the early going. The number one vector for breaches of cloud environments today is misconfiguration. The ones who have seen the greatest success in the massive transition to a cloud-based model have been the ones that started their digital transformation journey with a security transformation first. These organizations had already deployed a cloud-native security platform. They moved away from fossilized, on-premise security solutions, so they were set for success. They could confidently close their brick-and-mortar facilities and send their employees home and their workloads to the cloud. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell the future. Even if I could, the lawyers wouldn't let me. But one thing is clear, it won't look like the past. Work from anywhere is here to stay. Our customer Slack did a recent study and found that among workers who are used to working from home, a whopping 72% say they prefer working from home. And 60% of those veteran remote workers say they're more productive at home than in an office. Companies are recognizing the value of letting employees choose where they work. And whether they like it or not, they're going to have a hard time putting the work from anywhere genie back in the bottle. But I believe that's what true leaders do in business and technology. They're constantly looking forward, not backwards. They want to modernize their organizations, improve their work cultures, and adopt infrastructure that supports it. That means more reliance on the cloud, more reliance on SaaS applications and platforms that are agile, that can expand or contract along with business needs, that are easy to deploy and easy to manage, even when IT and security teams are also working remotely. The changes brought about by the global pandemic lit the fuse for a massive digital transformation movement. And it requires eliminating reliance on complex, fragile legacy technologies. Let's visit another CrowdStrike customer, this time in an industry that is laser focused on innovation and speed. Please welcome Toto Wolff, the CEO and principal of the Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula 1 team. He's joining us trackside from Monza, Italy, and from the team's headquarters in Brackley, England. We have COO Rob Thomas, along with the international motorsports announcer and commentator, Danny Hornigold.
Thanks, George. Formula One is a sport that's measured down to the thousandth of a second. It's a sport where the tiniest hesitation, the smallest of mistake can cost you points, can cost you victories, and ultimately it can cost you world championships. In the modern hybrid era, Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula 1 team have been the dominant force, winning all of the World Drivers and World Constructors Championships. And as they turned up this year for the inaugural race of the 2020 season in Australia, they couldn't imagine how quickly things would change. The global pandemic struck, racing was paused, and the team very quickly had to change and adapt. To talk to us about that and the way in which the team have evolved in this time, I'm joined from Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula 1 team by COO Rob Thomas. Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, Danny. It's good to be here.
And Rob, of course, in this virtual world we now live in, we've got to be joined remotely as well, as I'm joined by our team principal and CEO, Toto Wolff. Toto, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Rob, it's been the most unimaginable of circumstances. I mentioned there that we turned up in Australia. What processes do we have in place? What defined the right decision at the right time? Just how challenging was it?
Well, you're right, Danny. It's been an extraordinary year, and we could feel this thing building. And as it got worse and worse, we knew we were going to move into a lockdown situation. And it's like, well, how do we deal with this? None of our plans are meant for this. But as an organization, I think what we're good at adapting to change, and we're very, very sort of flexible. But above all, our number one priority throughout all of this was the safety of our people.
When we look at staying competitive and when we look at the challenges and adapting, it's not just been about the technology. And so I want to speak to yourself about that. A lot of people watching this may not be aware of your career prior to Formula One, where, of course, you were involved in multiple tech investment businesses. And I think if we look back at that time and your investments in tech and security firms, I just wonder, as you've got to know CrowdStrike, what synergies you can see between yourselves as a team and CrowdStrike?
As a matter of fact, I think we are very aligned from a human side. You can see that looking at George with all the other activities. He's an astute racing driver, and moving those machines needs skill and needs adaptability. And I think this is what is at the core of our business. It's not always the faster company that wins, but it's the more adaptable company that wins.
Brilliant. Thanks, Toto. Rob, I just want to talk to you about CrowdStrike ultimately, and the fact that they saw this sudden surge in cyber threats. The outbreak took place globally, and all of a sudden there's these huge numbers being reported. How did you cope with that? All of that data that you're working so hard to protect, but also any potential threat could cause you to have to lift at some point.
I think, as you rightly say, Danny, as the COO, I kind of like people to be here. I can get my arms around it, I can see it, I can touch it. And all of a sudden they're gone into a world that we couldn't actually see, into this cloud where a lot of our data was put. And before that, we'd been really nervous of the cloud. We'd not really used it before because we were just concerned about it. And suddenly it's all gone. Now, what gave me, and I know gave the organization, a huge amount of comfort was knowing we had CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike with this umbrella of protection across all of our data, independent of where people were in the world, we know it was secure. And that way we could actually get on and operate as close to normal as we can. And that way we can keep adding performance to the car. So it was so fundamental to us during this period that I believe if we didn't have it, we wouldn't have the car we have today.
And Toto, I want to wrap up by coming to yourself. What are the differences or the learnings and the way in which we operate that you think we might take forward beyond the current circumstance?
In an environment where IP is at the core of what we do, we would lose a big advantage if some of that would get lost or reach our competitors. And therefore our security software and cybersecurity software is very complex, back at base in the factory. Now add to the equation that we actually had to move our engineers into remote places at home, created a huge task of how can we provide a safe environment without the risk of losing any of the IP. And there CrowdStrike really moved heaven and earth, provided us with all the tools, with all the security that we as a high-tech organization need, and we couldn't have done that without CrowdStrike's software.
Brilliant. Toto, thank you so much for joining us today. Rob, thank you for joining us as well. Absolutely fascinating insights. And George, back to yourself.
We're thrilled and grateful to play a role in the team's unbelievable success. It goes to show that extraordinary leadership finds a way to not only survive, but to thrive, even when confronted by extreme conditions. Like many organizations that had avoided going to the cloud, COVID left them no choice. They had to take the plunge and embrace this transformation, and they trusted CrowdStrike to keep them and their newly distributed workforce safe and secure. The cloud isn't some idea to consider for the future. It's today's reality. I want to make a very important point here. All cloud is not created equal. We're seeing a real gulf emerging, and that's one that IT and security leaders need to take the time to understand. It's the growing divide between cloud native and cloud retrofit. I left McAfee 9 years ago to start a new company because I saw this gap widening, and I knew that the fossilized security technologies of the previous 20 years could never make the leap to the cloud. They were too invested in that old on-prem 1990s style of architecture. They would never abandon it, not completely, and so could never catch up. But when CrowdStrike came along and proved that there was a better way, at least their marketing departments got the message. They started putting pieces of their products up in the cloud, trying to give themselves and their platforms a little cloud flavor to make them seem more modern, more marketable. But it's one thing to take a decades-old, fundamentally obsolete on-prem system and retrofit it with a few cloud capabilities. It's another thing entirely to build cloud-native platform from scratch, designed from the ground up to harness today's most advanced and innovative technologies. I started CrowdStrike because I saw a sea change in the way security had to be delivered. A lot of us came up in an era where security was just about protecting endpoints and networks. For networks, you had firewalls, and for endpoints, you had multiple bloated software agents that required daily updates running on every single desktop and server. Then the world changed. The idea of maintaining a secure perimeter around your network stopped being effective or even feasible. Today, the endpoint is effectively your perimeter. It's a file server, a workstation, and a firewall all rolled into one. And the endpoints themselves have become more than just computers. They can be mobile or IoT devices like my watch, or a doorbell, or a machine on the factory floor. In fact, the word endpoint itself is becoming dated. In many cases, it's not even a physical device anymore. It can be a virtual machine, an instance, or a container. It can be here 1 minute and gone the next. A more modern term for these units is workloads. I define a workload as anything that combines compute, storage, and network connectivity. The point is, whatever it is, physical or virtual, and wherever it is, on a private network or out in the cloud, you have to protect it. This demands a new way of thinking about security. It's not just about protecting endpoints anymore. It's about protecting workloads. Endpoints are just a subset. Since CrowdStrike started, we had a vision for the cloud as the clear platform of choice for delivering the future of data security. This crazy year has made that vision a reality. What we created, a full-featured security platform in the cloud and for the cloud, was actually made to order for the situation we find ourselves in today. We were built for this moment, and we are built for the future. We're built to scale, to stop breaches using the power of the cloud and the crowd.